Welcome to Marriott Library's Facebook Live event. My name is Allyson Mower, librarian and head of scholarly communication and copyright. Today's event is a conversation with Dr. Chris Linder and Ashley Yong of the McCluskey Center for Violence Prevention about a new book club that they are launching and other programming from the center. I will introduce both of them here very shortly. Marriott Library does these events as part of our mission to inspire the creation, discovery, and use of knowledge for Utah and the world. The McCluskey Center for Violence Prevention's mission is to serve as a national leader in the effort to eliminate relationship and sexual violence among U.S. college students. It is named after Lauren McCluskey, a communications major at the U, who was senselessly murdered by someone she briefly dated in October of 2018. The center strives to honor Lauren's legacy by working to end relationship and sexual violence among college students. Dr. Linder directs the center, and Ashley Yong serves as program coordinator. Welcome, and thank you both for doing this event with us. Dr. Linder is also the author of the book that we're going to discuss today. It's a very compelling book titled Sexual Violence on Campus: Power-Conscious Approaches to Awareness, Prevention, and Response. If you want to join in today's discussion by asking your own question, please do so. You can submit them on the library's Facebook page, and Jordan Hansen, the library's media specialist, will relay them. The library has Dr. Linder's book in the collection, which is how I came to read it. Jordan is going to post the link to the book if you want to check it out for yourself, which I highly recommend that you do. So welcome, Chris and Ashley. Thank you again for being here. So I have a set of 8 questions, and we're just going to go through the 8 questions, but this really is just a nice informal conversation. There's people watching on Facebook, and they're going to post questions too. So like I was saying, Jordan will relay those to us. So we really want it to feel like it's a campus-wide conversation. In your book, Chris, you talk about the need for self-awareness and reflection when engaging in social justice and addressing systems of oppression. I thought maybe we could start with how you see the book club that you are starting as contributing to this aspect of violence prevention.
Thanks, Allyson, for having us. And thank you so much for including us as a program in the library's programming this semester. I know you've been doing these book clubs for a while, and I'm really excited to get to be a part of it. So thank you for that. In terms of the piece around self-awareness and reflection, when we're dealing with any issues related to social justice and systems of oppression, I think that this is especially important for looking at and thinking about issues of relationship and sexual violence, because this is one of those aspects of our culture that all of us have absorbed messages about what violence is, what domestic violence is, dating violence, what sexual assault is. We've also all absorbed different kinds of messages about what it means to share about our experiences with violence. We've absorbed all kinds of messages about who perpetrators of violence actually are. And unfortunately, many of those myths or messages we've internalized are myths, and all of us have them. And they sort of guide our work in unconscious ways. Like I said, this is an issue that we've been taught about, especially as people who've been socialized as girls or women. We've been taught about this since we were little bitty children, to be afraid of strangers, to always be looking out for our surroundings. There's so many messages we've received. And in fact, a lot of them are inaccurate. The vast majority of violence that happens between 2 people who know each other. And so when we socialize people to be afraid of strangers, we're actually misinforming them. And I'm not advocating that people go around and be blasé about their surroundings and not pay attention and not be careful. Certainly, those are all things that we should be mindful of, especially if it makes us feel more comfortable. My concern is that when we're only conscious about strangers and stranger danger, then we're missing a lot of other kinds of harm that happen to us and people around us that we often minimize as a result of internalizing all these messages. And so I think this self-awareness and reflection is really important, because we have to really understand what are the beliefs and values and assumptions I hold around this topic, and where did those come from, and how are those serving me and my community or not serving me and my community. And so I think that's a really big piece of the puzzle, and something that we hope to do through the book club. And just really, I can go on and on, sorry. But another piece of the book club, or way that we hope to do that with the book club, is by focusing on historically minoritized populations, experiences with violence, relationship violence, sexual violence, state violence, all of those sorts of things. Because unfortunately, around this topic on college campuses, the vast majority of the time, cisgender, heterosexual, middle-class white women are the face of the issue. And the reality is violence impacts people from all different backgrounds and experiences and identities. And in fact, people with minoritized identities actually experience higher rates of violence. And so we want to make sure that people understand how and why this happens, so that white women aren't the only face of violence on our campuses.
That definitely segues into question 2. But before we move there, I really appreciated that aspect of your book, that it goes beyond just the conversation of stranger danger, which, like you're saying, is so much of American youth, storytelling around this issue of violence. So I really appreciate that. And so Ashley, is there anything else you want to add to sort of how you envision this book club kind of helping to go deeper in the way that Dr. Linder's book also went a little bit more in depth?
Yeah, we are very excited to also focus our book club on primary prevention. While a lot of conversation around sexual violence on campus and among students is typically focused on secondary and tertiary prevention, we really see this book club as a way to engage each person on campus in primary prevention. So that can look like educating ourselves, intervening upstream before violence happens, and like Dr. Linder was saying, examining the root of violence, which are power and oppression. So primary prevention is a big focus of our center, and not often centered in the conversation when it comes to sexual violence. So we're really excited to incorporate that into the core of the club and the discussions that we have.
Nice. Yeah, you definitely need that kind of space and opportunity to explore more. Yeah. Okay, so question 2, it's about statistics. So I was glad you were mentioning that, Chris. So can you give us just some basic stats? I know in your book you talked about 1 in 4 college women experience sexual violence, but what are the stats about those who cause harm?
Thank you so much for asking this. This is something I feel very passionate about. And in fact, in all of my when I do presentations and do writing on this, I try really, really hard to use active voice, which I'm guessing you appreciate as a librarian. But the idea behind active voice is naming who the active actors are. So instead of saying, like 1 in 4 women will be victimized, I will try really hard to say perpetrators target 1 out of 4 college women. So then it's not like it's just happening out of thin air, but someone is actually engaging in the harmful behavior. But what the statistics are really challenging, because we don't have very solid research on perpetration of intimate partner violence. We have a little bit better research on perpetration of sexual violence, but I did a content analysis a few years ago with a research team, and what we found is that more than 50% of the research published between 2006 and 2016 focused on victimization risk factors, and fewer than 10% of the research published during that time focused on perpetration risk factors. So all of that to say is that it's really hard to know much about who's engaging in perpetration. What I do know, what the research does indicate, is that it's somewhere between between 15 and 30% of college men have engaged in behavior that meets the legal definition of sexual assault. So the challenge is they don't often identify the behavior as harmful. It's just behavior that they've been socialized to engage in as a result of having poor sex education and myths and misunderstandings about what it means to be a man and those sorts of things. The other thing that's emerging is that we know that other people, so most of the perpetration research has focused on men historically, but we also know that other people are engaging in harmful behavior, and those populations we definitely know little about. So there are women engaged in perpetration of violence or harm. There are also people, non-binary people engaged in harmful behavior. But we know very little about those populations because most of the perpetration research has historically focused on men.
What about patterns?
Yeah.
There are some patterns of perpetration that you feel like campuses can address in a preventative way.
Yes. So one of the big ones is exactly this notion of people not understanding what harmful behavior is. So better sex education. And a lot of people will say, well, it's too late by the time they get to college. I wholeheartedly disagree. It is never too late. Yes, in a dream world, we would live in a world where kids are getting really solid sex education throughout their lifetimes. And they still need it when they get to college, because college is a time when people, especially for students who come to college at traditional ages, like the young adulthood, late adolescence, those folks are in a stage in their life where they're figuring out, how do I want to be in relationship with other people? Who am I? What do I want in a long-term partnership? How do I want to show up in a long-term partnership? And so we do have a responsibility and an opportunity to engage people around what's healthy relationship behavior and what's behavior that's harmful that you may not consider harmful, but other people might experience as harmful, right? So things like manipulation, ignoring boundaries is a huge red flag. So, and we see this all the time in our culture. This is my biggest in our culture broadly, right? So personally, I'm not a movie person. I just don't enjoy pop culture. I don't do movies. And so when I say that to people, inevitably the response from a lot of friends and a lot of people in my life is, oh, but you would like this one. Right? I just set a boundary, and instead of somebody respecting that and be like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Right. There's a pushback, right? And so we do this all the time in our culture. And so sometimes we don't even think about it as ignoring somebody's boundaries, but as a culture, we're bad at respecting people's boundaries. When somebody says no, we expect an explanation for their no. It's hard for us to understand when someone says, one of our McCluskey Center for Violence Prevention sweatshirts, on the back it says no is a complete sentence. That's one of our sort of mottos. And so I think those are some examples of just manipulation, ignoring boundaries, not paying attention to just like subtle signs from people, right? And sometimes not even paying attention to the very explicit no's that people are giving us, because we've been told our whole lives that no is something just to push back on.
Right. Yeah, there's kind of like this judgment that happens in our culture when somebody says no, even to something as like mundane as like, a pop culture or movie that's just come out or whatever. Yeah, it's like if that person is not sharing your taste, then you're sort of like, well, there must be something wrong with you. Let me push a little bit further. So yeah, that's definitely a cultural thing that people have adopted, even in college age, and like most especially in college age.
Another one I wanted to include along the line of boundaries is consent. And that's a cultural norm that we don't often think about on a campus. So we talk about even asking for consent when you want to give someone a hug. That's a really big one, right? And it's not something that we normally do. We just, if we're friendly with someone, we just assume that we can give them a hug and there's no issue with it. And just like Dr. Linder said, it may feel weird to ask, And as someone in my 20s, most of my knowledge about consent has been from movies or TV shows or books. And that's not a great place to get your education, which is why I'm really excited that we're having this book club and that our center exists, because we do recognize that so many people have gotten their education about consent from the media. And we're here to disrupt that narrative.
Nice. So Ashley, do you see the readings, like, do you see them kind of being expansive that way, like fiction and nonfiction, and so that you're getting that full sense of like how characters could deal with consent and saying no and receiving a no, and, you know, just all those day-to-day being a human events?
Absolutely. Social pressure is so real and it's so quiet. Like, we don't actively think about, oh, this thing that I just read, that's maybe not necessarily normal, or that's maybe not necessarily an appropriate way to ask for consent. We're just consuming information as passive consumers, you know? So in fiction, in nonfiction, there's a lot of work that we can do when it comes to interrupting the harmful behaviors that people have normalized.
That's very cool. So, Dr. Linder, I like how in your book you talk about the importance of integrating accurate information about the dynamics of power and privilege and oppression that can basically kind of get combined into like a campus policy or a procedure or like a program, just like long-standing, you know, campus entities. So have you seen a good example of a campus kind of, I don't know, dealing with that like combination of power, privilege, and oppression that might exist in a policy or a program, and kind of dismantling those elements with, you know, in whatever program, situation, or policy, like whatever you maybe have seen a good example of?
Yeah, this one's really tough. I think there are lots and lots of examples of people understanding this and really trying hard to put power, privilege, and oppression front and center in this work. I think, for example, our very own, the Center for Student Wellness on campus does a phenomenal job integrating issues of power and privilege into their programming. So I think they're a good example of doing it. I think the other place that, so in policy, it's harder to do because the very nature of policies, it's supposed to be neutral, right? Like it's really, really difficult. The one area I feel like I'm seeing a tiny bit of progress on, it's not explicit yet, but people are starting to think about it, is in those darn campus client or campus safety alerts we have to send out, right? So those have been super challenging historically on college. That the Clery Act went into effect in 1990, and colleges and universities have struggled since then. I wasn't an administrator then, but since I've been an administrator, to figure out how to implement the Clery Act, and how the spirit of the act is to make people aware of potentially unsafe situations on and around campus so that people can make choices about how to keep themselves safe. That's the spirit of the act. The implementation of that is much more difficult because there are all kinds of rules about what you share and what you don't share and all those sorts of things. And then the other thing that has happened is that those alerts for a long time were overtly racist. They would only put on, and this is on college campuses across the country. I did a study one year where we pulled alerts from campuses all over the place. And campuses were only naming the race of the perpetrator or the person who caused harm if the perpetrator was a person of color. If they were white, they never named the race, right? Oh, wow. And so that's an example of unconscious/conscious bias, really problematic, puts men of color in particular in really precarious situations because they feel like they're going to be the target, especially if they're on a predominantly white campus and they're one of few men that even remotely match the definition of the person being sought that caused harm. That puts them in a really precarious situation. So what we're starting to see shift, and we're doing this here at the U, is that we don't use racial identifiers. We use descriptors of skin color, eye color, hair color, those sorts of things. So it's a step in the right direction. Again, not perfect, but that's an example of people finally waking up and saying, you know what, you're right. I never thought of it that way, but what can we do to both honor the spirit of the law and make it so that people on our campus maybe don't feel quite as unsafe as the potential target of the perception that they're a perpetrator, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So do you see that as kind of an ongoing mission of the McCluskey Center? Like, because that's a lot to have to really take on for a large university.
Yeah, I feel like, so that's a tough one, because like Ashley was talking about earlier, really our focus is on primary prevention, and that kind of stuff is really response to violence after it happens. So personally, my preference would be that we don't spend a lot of time on it, because there's what we want to be spending our time on is identifying harmful behaviors and engaging with people who are causing harm before they start getting to high levels of harm. So engaging with people around that low level harm, or maybe even pre-harm. So figuring out what are the things that can help us understand the like thought process that people go through before they cause harm, so that we can intervene long before that. So we'll be doing research on perpetration and patterns of perpetration, and then eventually interventions with people who maybe are likely to cause harm. That's where we want to be spending our time and energy. That said, response is not 100% separate from prevention. There's definitely an overlap in those circles. And so we're definitely a campus partner with Youth Safety. I have all those people's phone numbers in my cell phone. When something happens, we're frequently in communication about response and that sort of thing, but it's not going to be the focus of the center, if that makes sense. The focus is, because I trust the people in Youth Safety to handle that and to keep getting better and better at response. And our job is to put them out of a job eventually. Right. So
yeah, that definitely makes sense. Like, because the prevention piece is so difficult and challenging on its own. Like, yeah, figuring out the response too would have to be much more a team effort. I liked how you talked about, I'm the new Senate policy liaison. I just got appointed about 2 weeks ago now, or a week ago. So when I was reading your book, I was really struck by the questions that policy writers and policy enactors should really focus on. You know, who is this policy written for? Who will it impact that's being left out? And I'd like just kind of seeing that in a single sentence was really useful as someone who is going to maybe see some of these policies come through. And I think like working with the Senate and like Youth Safety, like you said, but like working with other entities on campus to really almost like be doing audits of policies around like, you know, sexual violence and relationship violence, I think could maybe be another beneficial thing for the institution. Okay, so let's maybe move into the first book that you're going to read for the Anti-Violence Book Club. Is it okay if I announce it, or do you want to both announce it? Okay, so Sexual Citizens is the book. It's by Jennifer Hirsch and Seamus Khan. Yay! I was going to grab the library's copy and then I didn't get to it. So thank you, Ashley, for having that. So tell us why you selected this book.
Ashley, would you like to start on this one, or would you like me to?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so a couple of reasons. One, this book is provocative. It really turns the ideas, those assumptions I was talking about earlier about what we believe about relationship and sexual violence among college students, those sort of things. It really turns it on its head and says, wait a minute, most of the time when people are engaging in harmful behavior in college, those folks don't know they're engaging in harmful behavior. It's because we haven't taught them what to do. So they make the analogy that we would never send a 16-year-old out in a car without them having driver's ed, but we send young adults out to have relationships with each other all the time without any sort of good education. And so they're hurting each other, partially, and that's our responsibility as adults for not doing a better job of providing space for them to ask real questions, engage in real dialogue about what does it mean to engage in sex with each other, and what does it mean to engage in romantic relationships. So that's part of it. The other reason we chose this book is that these authors are very intentional about integrating aspects of identity into their work. And so they're very, very good at addressing issues of class, race, gender identity. This is the best research I've seen so far about gender identity as it intersects with relationship and sexual violence. And what I mean by gender identity are people who don't identify as either man or woman, but identify somewhere along a gender continuum, or maybe identify as a trans man or a trans woman. They just did a beautiful job really addressing the issues that students who identify that way are managing and negotiating in a deep way as opposed to a surface level way. So those are the biggest reasons that we chose this. And then the other thing is that, well, that's not the reason we chose, but as a result of choosing it, Drs. Hirsch and Kahn are actually coming to campus in January to spend a couple days with us, sort of talking about their research, things that they've seen working on other campuses, those sorts of things. So we're excited to host them as well.
Cool.
We're also really delighted by this book because they explore a lot of concepts that aren't often at the center of sexual violence on campus discussions. For example, they talk about the contributions of physical space when it comes to sexual violence. And it's not something we often think about, of how is the culture around res life? Who lives in our residential halls? How does that contribute to sexual violence? And along with our authors coming as well, it's just like a book that does such a deep and comprehensive study of college students. And while violence happens in so many different populations, in this book club, we're specifically focusing on college students and how these students experience sexual violence, how these students cause harm. So it really seemed like the perfect fit for our first book.
Nice. Yeah, I totally agree. I really appreciated how the authors really told holistic stories. Like, it's a different kind of reading experience when it came to, learning more about sexual violence on campus. And it really, like, for me as one of the readers, it was eye-opening for me to see all the forms that sexual violence can come in on campus. That, like you were saying earlier, Dr. Linder, that it's more than just stranger danger, and that it just can happen in so many almost innocent situations. And it's like those that may be perpetrating and those who are receiving are completely unaware that that's what is happening. So it was very enlightening that way. And you do also focus on this really well in your book too, Chris, like the sociocultural factors, the power and entitlement and the dominance factors. Like, those are tough topics to have to really get into with, early adulthood or even mid-adulthood college students. So what do you like? Are there other fundamental aspects of sexual violence prevention that you think this initial selection will really help participants understand better, more deeply?
Yeah, for me, one of the biggest ones, and this is a culture shift we've been working on for a while, is humanizing people who cause harm. So helping people understand that perpetrators aren't always necessarily terrible, awful, evil human beings who set out to cause harm to everyone around them all the time. Those perpetrators do exist, but that they're not all the perpetrators, right? And so this is a tension that I wrestle with a lot, because I don't want anyone to hear, oh, she feels sorry for perpetrators because they know not what they do, kind of thing. It's not necessarily that, right? Like, we all have a responsibility to understand who we are and how we show up in the world, and pay attention to how we're impacting people around us. And so that is for sure very, very important. And also recognizing we don't live in a culture that allows especially men to do that very well. We have socialized our men to not be empathetic, to not be close with each other in relationships, to not have an outlet for expressing feelings. And all of that stuff contributes to lack of empathy, which contributes to not understanding how we're engaging and how we're impacting the people around us. And so that's our collective responsibility to help people engage differently around that. And unfortunately, right now, that disproportionately impacts men. Men are the ones who are primarily responsible for engaging in harmful behavior. And a lot of that has to do with that socialization that's related to, because as soon as you start intervening with it, you're challenging power, and that makes people really uncomfortable, right? Like if I have to admit that my best friend, my colleague, my son, maybe is causing harm in ways that he doesn't understand, that rocks people's worlds and is very difficult to have a conversation about. But like you said, in this book and others, I've been collecting lots of examples of this. There's a couple of really good podcasts that illustrate this as well. Is really helping people understand the human aspect of the people who are causing harm and how we might do a better job as a culture engaging with those people prior to them getting to a higher level of causing harm.
That just seems so important to me. And it's so nice that this is the main mission of the McCluskey Center. It is obviously very needed. So what other educational opportunities is the center providing besides the book club?
So we are ready to hit the ground running. This is our second year of the MCVP, and our staff and our working group are so excited to engage the campus community in violence prevention. So one of the ways we do that is we offer tailored educational series, and these can be customized to a specific group's needs. This is really important, right? Because we want the folks that are a part of the different things that we're educating about to relate it to themselves and to relate it to the work that they're doing, maybe on campus or off, even in their personal lives. So for example, we offer a series on historical contexts of sexual violence. And we offer so many different things to students and also faculty and staff in recognition that it truly is everyone's responsibility on campus to engage in violence prevention work. So it's not just for students, but with that in mind, of course, we need a little bit of a heads up before we get those types of requests to work with you all. And another way that you all can engage is our working groups. So we're getting them started. They're meeting for the first time this year, this month. And there are 4 different working groups folks can engage in. The first is preventing harm. The second is engaging men. You don't have to identify as a man to be a part of this group. Campus education, and our community and identity-based education working group. So we'll be posting about our working groups all across social media this week to hope that we get people, again, students, staff, faculty, everyone that's a member of our campus community involved in these working groups.
Nice. And then how can people participate in the book club?
Yeah, so for the book club specifically, we're excited to meet monthly for discussions about a few chapters at a time. If you all sign up at this link right above me, that's also in the description. We'll even be releasing somewhat of a loose reading schedule for the folks that like that, to make sure that you have the book read before our authors come and speak in January, which is exciting. But even if you're a person that doesn't have the time to read exactly what we're going to be discussing, we invite everyone to come and participate in those discussions, and we'll keep in contact with folks via email, even, talk about discussion questions via email sometimes to get people's brains churning. And also it's really meant to be an inclusive space. So again, if folks haven't read the book or just want to come talk about sexual violence, they are welcome in this space. We're also excited with the book club to offer a discussion on self-preservation when it comes to reading. I am the type of person to read right before bed, and reading about sexual violence right before bed can be really heavy. So, we're not always expecting people to just take this all lightheartedly and to just pick it up and put it down when you're done reading. It can be difficult. So we are excited to have those discussions as well.
Oh, yeah, I appreciated your comment, Ashley, about how it's everybody's responsibility on a university campus to really engage in prevention. And so, yeah, kind of knowing that that's our responsibility, but being able to kind of have some tips on how to best preserve our own well-being when talking about difficult topics is really very welcome and useful. So thank you for that.
Absolutely. I also feel like there's this perception of a certain type of person that joins a book club or that does violence prevention work. And like I said, we are welcoming everyone. Everyone with their experiences brings different strengths to the table. In our working groups, we have folks from fine arts, from the libraries, in administrative roles, and everything in between. And yeah, so that's why we're excited to engage everyone that we can.
Great. Well, those are all of my questions. Is there anything else that you both want to relay about the center or any of your educational programming? I really hope people pick up Chris's book because it really is wonderful. And I know you're a little bit shy about, us really focusing on it, but I just really want to give it, a 5-star rating because it was also very eye-opening for me to read.
Thanks, Allyson. I would say also just about the book is very short, and the number one piece of feedback I've gotten about it is that it's very applicable and practitioner focused. It's not as researchy or academic as some people expected it to be when they first picked it up. So that might be something else. I also just wanted to reiterate what Ashley said. I just want to say it again. We welcome anyone who wants to be involved to come to the center. The working groups have been so beautiful. We sent out a call for members a year and a half ago. We got 150 people from all over campus responding.
Wow.
And what's so cool about it is exactly what Ashley said. People are coming from all different perspectives, fine arts, like she said, the College of Business, all over campus, people are coming. And the way I like to think about it is that people are coming with, like Ashley said, there's a perception out there about who gets to be the expert on this topic. And the reality is we're all the experts on our own experiences, and our experiences often include experiences with harm and violence. And so we bring that with us. We're also the expert on our context, right? And so one of the examples I think about a lot is that we had a person who's affiliated with the College of Fine Arts come, and she said our students deal with this in a very different way than some other students because of the ways that they're in close contact with each other so much outside the classroom. And it was something that had never dawned on me before, but her simply saying that had an impact and a shift in my mindset and how I was thinking about different groups of students managing this issue differently. And so that's the other piece, is that maybe Ashley and I have some expertise around the actual content of relationship and sexual violence, but other people have much more expertise on the various contexts on campus and how this topic intersects with that context. And so that's what we're looking for. We want this to be community oriented, like Ashley was saying. So I just wanted to reiterate and give a couple of examples of that as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And, it really also, like Chris, you were saying, it comes down to like one's behavior, like, and how you relate to other humans. And like, I think so much of that gets kind of dictated in different ways, but yeah, it's like the more context of how you have used students kind of interact with each other, then the better like that can get reflected in policies and programs and whatever other entities are set up within the institution. Like I'm thinking of like the student code or the faculty code. Like I read them all the time, and I am pretty sure there's not like this basic like here's how you should not harm each other concept in either of those codes. So like kind of learning to take responsibility for your own actions, but first knowing about them. And I think that the book club and your programming is helping people to know about them. And then it's like maybe the next step in these codes, we could help to sort of shift the culture in that much more kind of, on the ground but structural way. So yeah, like getting that context though seems like really important, essential. Okay, so basically people should be watching your social media feeds, checking the center's website, and then for sure checking out the AV Book Club link to get either a reading schedule or just some basic information about dates and when other events are going to happen.
And we also have a newsletter I would love folks to sign up for, even if you're not sure if you do want to get involved with the center. We'd love for you all to stay up to date on what we are doing, and that is available on our website.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for both of your time today and your expertise and being willing to do this event. It was really wonderful. I've really enjoyed it. And we do post these recordings too. So hopefully we had a good amount of live watchers, and then we post the recordings too. So thank you so much to both of you. Thanks
Thank you.
on Facebook. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Have a good